Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you're at. Hope everything is going well for you in this strange situation we're all in the world. So the topic is traditional, goes way back, the Lankavatara Sutra and the works of Vasubandhu and other places, and tracked them all down particularly. It's called the three own beings, or sometimes the three natures, and it's just a construct that someone invented at some point to help us look more deeply into the nature of relative and ultimate truth. It's very simple, therefore it's extremely difficult to understand. I feel that it is deliberately constructed in such a way so that by using your conceptual mind, the one that the little oligarch we call the ego keeps trying to take over and strengthen, thinking, analyzing, judging, very logical. It kind of, when it bring that thinking process into the three own beings, it really pretty difficult to make much progress there intellectually. So it's kind of a setup. So the three, just to talk about them briefly, and I can take questions on this also, and I will attempt to, at least I'll respond. I don't know if I'll be able to help you or not, because it takes a lot of looking at this, and the understanding of that will not show up as conventionally understanding how to repair your plumbing or your something more practical. So Paratantra is Sanskrit for dependent origination. This dependent on that. Everything that you see is a separation, whether it's physical, whether it's a thought pattern, whether it's anything in your mind stream, anything in anyone else's mind stream that is coming out through their vocal cords as an apparent expression of what they're thinking about, or what they're thinking about, what you're thinking about, and all the complications that go on and on and on. Circles, lots of circles. Looks like straight lines, circles, circles. And then so the dependent origination, that Paratantra, or dependent on this, dependent on that. And there's lots of ways of talking about this, and I don't remember any of them, but I'm coming out of how this looks to me using that teaching. So I'm talking about how it looks, and I'm using this teaching in order to push that, because it's pretty difficult to come up with something much better than the three own beings. So things arise, they arise, they show up and they go away. They show up and they go away. Different aspects. You see the edge of a building, you see the corner of the roof as you're coming around it. You meet your friend, and those situations are dependently arisen. And then we add on, we put our own spice on, our own personal bug spray on that to change it. We don't want that. Or maybe we do. Maybe it isn't bug spray. Maybe it's some kind of grappling hooks where we get that. We pull it into our territory. We want it. We take, you could say, ownership. There are really intense forms of that. One of them is slavery. And the other one is just the grasping kind of love or desire, wanting that, desire. The second noble truth, wanting things to be other than they are. So those are the first two, Paratantra. Things are dependent on each other. Everything. Anything you can single out as a thing is dependent on something else for its apparent identity, singularity, own being. If through the sitting practice of meditation and other ways of working with the Dharma conceptually, just watching what moves in the mind, watching what moves in your kitchen, watching what moves on your neighbor's lawn. And without concluding anything, by just watching that and without particularly fueling the desperation of ego to be someone, somewhere, having something happen, it begins to become more clear. Though it's not particularly progress, it's just some kind of clarity begins to show up there through the one sitting practice in relationship to the various energies and structures of our own ego, our own hope and fear, the way we particularly are handling that with our life. It is said in many ways, the way I will say it is, if you see dependent origination, and then you see that you are adding, subtracting, dividing, and adding your own chemistry set to what is just there. In other words, you're creating more stuff. Then it's not necessary to stop doing that or to not do it or don't add on, even though that's part of the way that I teach it. I say don't add, but I know you can't stop it. I can't stop it. By saying that, we become more and more aware of the way whatever's happening. We have a little bit of a different idea. Maybe it should be this way. Even every conversation we have with ourselves or with others is seems to be a series of those kinds of things. If those are not happening, you're probably not saying much. So again, it's not about changing anything. It just looks like it, but it's not about that. It's even deeper. It's more profound. And I can use that word without even being able to define it, because we know what that is. It's profound. It's vast, immeasurable, extensive, without even the word extensive being necessary. So when we see Paratantra or dependently arisen, discusses that, this moves through space, fits that. Someone comes along and finds a tree with this shape inside of it, frees that shape from it with what tools? Even Michelangelo said that he looked in the marble, piece of marble there, and he took everything away that wasn't dubby. Just took away what didn't belong. That was his description. So by seeing dependent origination and noticing the way we add, subtract, divide, and modify that based on our own causes and conditions arising as our personal lifetime, our personal propensity to do anything, to think, to worry, to subtract, divide, to get something else, to be aggressive, to be passive, to be. Aggressive and passive are just two ends of the same hot dog. Anytime you have any polarity or anything, you're going to find some kind of an opposite to it. It may be very vague. It may be difficult to track down. But you should look there anyway. So then the imaginary nature that you put on there is Parakalpita. So Paratantra shows up, and then Parakalpita is we sprinkle it with our own chemicals, our own personal, shouldn't be that way, should be this. And this happens from the second you walk around the corner and see your friend coming up, immediately there's some otherness is happening about that. To one who has realized they always see themselves. And it's not a self, it's just a way of talking about it. They never see anything. They don't see other. And after this has been happening for a while, it's pretty ordinary. So you don't, until you notice that someone else is all tied up in their thought patterns about, I like it, I don't like it, it's good, it's bad, they shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't be doing this, I'm a terrible person, I'm a wonderful person. Until you meet someone who's doing that, you don't really notice that they don't realize what's right in front of them. So Paratantra, Parakalpita, put things on it, cover it up, change it, imaginary. This happens, and then we imagine we can get more of this, we can get less of this, we can stop this, we can start this, we can modify it, we can turn it over, we can paint it red. Do something with it. Constant thing is happening until you stumble into spiritual path until you stumble into a true teaching or a true teacher, one who teaches out of realization rather than out of relative knowledge. Rare. And there's no way you can tell, no way you can prove anything. If you're up to proving things, then misunderstanding. So the third one, going back through, we have Paratantra, we have Parikalpita, so dependently arisen, and then we have the imaginary nature, and then the third one is if you see this, if you see the first two clearly, fundamentally what those are, this is called Parinishpana, or the perfected nature, or the all three of them come together in, to use the Dzogchen words, the great perfection. It's just perfect. There's nothing to change. You can't fiddle with anything. There's nothing to fiddle with. There's nothing separate. This doesn't mean you don't change your mind and say, I'm not going to have lunch today, or I am going to have lunch. I'm going to have a salad, or I'm going to have a hamburger, or I'm going to do this or that, or I'm going to head this way or head that way, based on what you see arising. But the kind of decision that is being made in that situation is quite a bit different than the decision that is being made by someone who is in their mind stream trying to find right and wrong and success and failure and working it that way. And at the same time, because things are not separate, those are exactly the same thing. So it has to be realized. We can think about it, we can talk about it. If you read, it's described lots of different ways in the Lankavatara Sutra. Vasubandhu works on that quite a bit. Other teachers, as I said, I haven't studied all the history of that. Questions, if you have them? Jason?
The Jason bowing. The imaginary nature seems like it's also dependently arisen. So is the dependently arisen nature also the imaginary nature?
Everything is perfected. If you see it, if you see that there's dependently arisen, and then you see that we project onto that, we personify it, and then we see it as just what is true. It's supported by a Paratantra, dependently arisen.
What is changing between the perfected nature and the other two?
And nothing changes. That's why it's so difficult to see it, because at the same, to use the word time, at the same time you see it, it actually is not separate from it anymore.
Does the perceiver change?
There never really was a perceiver, so there really isn't anything to get rid of. So the perceiver may show up and may not. You're no longer at war with anything. You're not at war with war. If an ego shows up, you just see that it's unreal, even though it might have a really powerful voice or a powerful mudra.
It seems like the imaginary nature arises and that the perfected nature would not arise.
Yeah, the perfected nature doesn't arise.
Does the imaginary nature arise?
It appears to. And we see dependent origination, and we see that. Then we see that we add on to it imaginary nature, and it can show up lots of different ways. If you try to track it down and find out a way that where you okay, now if you get to the point where you say now I see what it is, you've missed it. It's not conclusive. You could say, if you wanted to say it with a kind of expression that might address that, it's living, it's alive. Not like a blood pumping organism, but it has a dynamic nature to it. As long as there's a living being here, a living being there, then the insight into that is going to be strong. But it's not two, so therefore nothing is happening and everything's happening. That's why it's so damn difficult to see it. And that's why I don't care how brilliant intellectually you are, you won't be able to calculate this in such a way that, if you have an aha moment, you're 3/4 of the way down the mountain. looking at what? Rusty bedpost.
Could you say more about what it means for something to have a living quality?
That it's dynamic. So that if you try to find a concept that bites into it and hangs onto it so you can contemplate it more, the three natures are pretty powerful. Something's dependently arisen. We imagine things about it. And if we see what we're doing, then that's perfected. Then that's transcendence.
What would it mean to relate to the entire path as a living situation?
I wouldn't go that far. More about that if you have it.
Is the path not a living situation?
It's my way of expressing that was to help to support the consciousness that is looking for a reference point. It's like trying to look at if you saw these fast-moving movies, where they take a picture of a plant and click, 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 click over a period of a month or something, and it looks like it grows, but we don't see it move. I was in retreat once, 40 some years ago, and watched a plant out the retreat hut for about a month. I never saw it move. But when it started, the leaf was this big, and when it ended, the leaf was this big. So, kind of a silly example, but it was like that. I didn't see any actual movement, just a little bit is happening all the time. It looks like stillness. More about that.
I'm just really intrigued by the idea of something having a living quality and how we can relate to things in a more dynamic way.
So the simplest way to relate to that is impermanence. You can't have impermanence unless you have permanence. You can't have the concept of impermanence. It won't make any sense unless you have something that is permanent or appears permanent. The contrast is what does that. Things seem to be toppling over, and other things seem to have some kind of longevity to them. But fundamentally, nothing lasts. Anything that shows up is going down, just in a different time frame. More?
Can we establish a relationship with a person or a situation and it still remain the dynamic situation?
The dynamic is not separate. So therefore, the connection, my situation connection from me to the lineage or to the teacher or to the Buddha is unchanging. Once that showed up, nothing ever happens there anymore. But everything that happens continues to happen in this kind of a dynamic. Things are coming and going. They show up, they change, they go this way, they die down, they get larger, they get smaller. But the Dharma doesn't do anything. Once it's seen, go ahead.
Does the Dharma, the unchanging Dharma, have qualities or anything that you could identify as the Dharma?
It's really nice. There are teachings that are of people that are much more adept at talking about all the qualities. There's long lists of qualities that could be talked about there, but I don't know how important. I'm not saying they're not important. That wouldn't be so good, but I think it needs to be seen. And if we lean too much on the qualities, then we tend to try to look for qualities, and looking for qualities is like looking in the wrong place because it's looking somewhere else. And what I say over and over again, you'll hear me say it again right now, it's right in front of you. What you're looking for is in front of you. And once it's seen, you no longer look for it. It's always there. Goes on.
If the perfected nature is realized, does the imaginary nature go away?
Paraphrase that. Simplify it if you can. Pretty simple already, but see if you can simplify it.
If the perfected nature is realized, this illusion that we're sitting in this room, does that change? Does that go away?
You see that it is an illusion. If you see it's an illusion, it doesn't have to do anything. It may go away, it may not. It may appear to go away in some ways and show up in other ways, get stronger in some areas. The difference between things is what starts to come apart. The difference between you and others, between who you're looking at. That's why it's sometimes said the function of the teacher is to introduce you to your world. Because that being, if they are a true teacher, doesn't see anything else.
So is what is meant by imaginary the perceived distinction or just apparent phenomena?
It varies with the person that is experiencing that or is going through that or would have that as an understanding of imaginary nature. Anything you add on and personify or personalize, and that there's a lot of ways that could show up. You're dreaming that up. It's imaginary.
Along those same lines, Shoto has a question. He asks, are color and shape part of the imaginary nature? They're imaginary in that you impute that color is different from shape. And this is the way we navigate in our world in order to get the good stuff and keep away the bad stuff. I don't like purple. I like red. I don't like squares. I like circles. So we pick and choose. We vote. Not that we shouldn't vote. Dependent origination is all over the place and is mixed in with very threatening, or call it threatening from the point of view of pain and pleasure, life and death, up and down, back and forth. Eight worldly dharmas, success and failure. So as soon as you separate anything through but discriminating awareness wisdom just sees the differences. It doesn't assign value. So that's so you don't stop seeing the difference between things. You don't start seeing doorways where there are walls. But to do anything with that, to conclude anything about it, that's some kind of a credential that you're somehow getting somewhere. That's circle, more like a circle, yes. Junshu asks, you said something like watch what moves without fueling the ego. When does watching what moves fuel the ego?
When you have an agenda about it. When the agenda is more than just, you have to have something. We have to say something. I have to say words. I don't have to. I could stay home. But here I am. And a few hours ago, I thought I would talk about this. So that's what I'm talking about. Even though when I think about it, I realize I don't really understand it in a conventional sense. And so there's some kind of other. We're looking for something else. We're not. Whatever we look at, we want something else. It's not that you have to be satisfied with what you're looking at. That's going a different direction. That's trying to sneak through the back door and have a really highly polished ego who doesn't want anything, who's fine with everything. I'm good. I'm good. Every now and then you will meet someone who is trying very hard to just be really good.
Susan Olcott asks, can it be said that all there is for humans is change/motion?
Yes, that's what you will see. That's the practice of seeing that. But if it's not even a result, but if you see it clearly, you'd see that nothing is actually moving or occurring. I don't know how else to say it. Other people have said it this way. It's has to be seen.
Jisho has a question. Can we know we have realized something as against having understood something?
I think if you realize what this is, then you have an understanding of what just understanding.
the understanding is still there, but the perception of not to or of dependent origination or the perfected nature is it's not seeing something else, it's seeing the entirety. And so that has depending on the individual, I would say that someone who is highly intellectual might be a strong area of description, or someone might, if they were going to teach this, might teach in a more intellectual way.
Shoto has another question. Since you can't recognize the movement of that growing plant in your retreat, does that mean the consciousness that sees that is permanent?
No.
And Shoka has a question.
Shuka.
If one sees the unchanging nature of things, is there still impermanence?
The way I am understanding you're asking the question, I would say yes.
And then he has a follow-up question. If situations appear impermanent, does that reflect a belief in a permanent self?
Yeah, more than likely. Very funny.
Ondo has a question.
Ondo.
Does contrast and motion point to separation?
Yes, it would point to that, but one's understanding of it may still be operating in terms of some kind of otherness or some kind of other powered situation. But that's why it seems to be necessary to just continue to look at it. It's for consciousness not to include anything is completely unimaginable by the ego. Ego can't imagine being there, being present, or being in any situation without something happening.
She has another question. Is seeing separation the same as looking for something else?
Not necessarily. If you're just receiving, there's for lack of a better word, there's a process that through training the mind that one goes through that where there's less and less and less grasping or pushing and pulling or navigating or objecting to or agreeing with, and more just receiving. So that's going to show up with people in different ways. We have to do it. Each person has to do this themselves. And we have as a support, we have the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, the three jewels, which people use in different ways. Everyone doesn't need to become a monk. It might help, but if that's not your thing, then do something else.
Juzan asks, what is own being?
It's it's just another way of saying the three natures, or the three ways that we can view the complexity or the simplicity of the situation. So I'm not sure what the translation out of the Sanskrit would be for own or svabhava, or however it may show up. So I don't know what that is, other than it has its own. It's a way of talking about it, so you can talk about it as something, just like talking about shunyata or emptiness. It's a way of talking about Vishnapti Matra or mind only, or just using concepts so in as simple a way as possible, so that we can begin to see more deeply into the way the conceptual structure points to some aspect of our lived experience as apparent beings, conscious beings, human beings, to help us see more deeply into Is there a ground to this? What is this? What is this situation? That's why what questions are so helpful. So anytime anything is happening, if you just say what, everything slows down so you can look at the fine detail, all the gauze that's passing in front of what you're objecting to, all of the texture that is showing up as similar to what you're looking for, but unlike what you're looking at.
Michael Stoltz asks, is eternity and a moment the same thing?
Sure. If you're using a moment as a concept and eternity as a concept, yeah, they're the same. They're both concepts. Chocolate cake and lemon meringue pie. Two different pies, but get pie. Pie are squared. Go ahead.
Shadow asks, is there permanence?
So permanence, impermanent, we use that relatively. There's Kaiser Permanente, which sells their brand. People use those ideas. Most of the time, they're using those to manipulate others to get their way, to get some kind of benefit, some kind of fame, or some kind of control, or some kind of power. But they feed off from each other. In other words, you can't have permanence without things that are impermanent. So they're concepts, and they approach or apply to somewhat of our lived experience, but it's not. If you settle for that, then you actually are. You stop looking any deeper, and you just go with that understanding of permanence or temporariness.
Oh, you're bowing. Is Buddha nature permanent? Bowing.
So it's if you want to go there, I would say it's if we want to use that kind of reference, I wouldn't call it permanent, but I would call it unborn unceasing, which is a traditional one that we hear. It doesn't come into existence, so therefore cannot pass out of existence. It's like, this is why the shunyata, or emptiness, is often used as a way of directing our minds to the nature of everything. This is empty of what we think it is. This is empty of personhood, but it sure doesn't look like it, nor does it feel like it. And we have all these nerve endings that are constantly screaming at us. Yes, you're here, you feel good, or yes, you're here, you feel neutral, or yes, you're here, and you feel great. You're enjoying the sunrise, or you want to walk and do meditation in the woods because it's so peaceful. And this is just another way of avoiding impermanence, is through enjoyment. Go ahead.
Kiyun asks, when grasping lessens, what happens to emptiness?
Well, the very nature of emptiness is nothing's going to happen to it. But if you're asking, when you as a person begin to stop grasping for something else, including enlightenment, then what the teaching of shunyata begins to show up. You could say it. I think that's what you're asking. Then you just naturally see that whatever you see is not. It's what it is. It's not what we impute or what we imagine or what we add on. Goes on.
Is what's being referred to with the perfected nature the same as the term Buddha nature?
Some of those words are connect together, yeah. So we're always using words, so they're always fall short of what is being understood or pointed to. So I would say, the way you're asking me, I would say you could use those interchangeable. But then when you start to talk about the three natures, it's hard to put that in, because then you have to come up with some other invention or some other simile that might work for the other two, which you probably could. But the next thing you know, you're a scholar. You're starting to write books on the three natures, and how they would really show up this way or that way. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm saying, good idea to just train your mind if you can. And at the same time, totally validate those questions. So bring those questions this way so that I can see it like I don't know how to answer them.
Shoto has another question.
Yes.
How does something that's unborn get laminated onto something that has an apparent birth?
It's not laminated. It's not separate from it. That's why it makes it so damn difficult, because we think we have to get rid of something. I think you have to get rid of the ego so you can see your wonderful Buddha nature. So I use the word laminated sometimes because it's expedient, convenient, or whatever. Fundamentally, it's not separate. And that's what's scary to ego, because it realizes that it is a sham. It cannot breathe in that kind of a void.
Susan has another question. Is impermanence a living entity?
The way I understand that you're asking it, I would say, no, it's just a concept. It's just a way of talking about phenomena coming and going, about so-called objects, human beings, situations, weather.
JD has a question.
JD from Lake George
Or Fort Wayne.
or Fort Wayne.
Yeah. Are you free from angry moods? And if not, what do you do when they arise?
I get pissed off, and so should you. And what am I saying? I'm saying, don't concern yourself too much with that. I mean, unless you do, if you're worried about it, then go ahead and worry about it, or fret about it, or attribute, oh, it's because of this, or my dad was like that, or I get mistreated. But don't, as they say, grab the bull by the horns. Find out about bulls. There's no point. This is just a macho kind of way of working with it, trying to stop emotions or activities or bias or pride or shame. Or don't do anything with it other than just look at it. And so, yes, I don't do it often, but I can get upset or get mad. I'm not concerned with that at all.
Wendy asks, is taking comfort in impermanence grasping?
Not when I do it. And the way you're asking that, probably not when you do it either, Wendy. It's pretty sneaky of you. Yeah. I'm not going to tell tattletale on Wendy, but if something is really terrible that's going on and you know it's not going to last, you should take comfort. Like, we all know lots of things that are going on. Like my own personal one would be I have a herniated disc in my spine. I think, we're not positive. Feels like it. And I take comfort in knowing that that's not going to last. So if that's what you're talking about, then right on, Wendy.
Liam Lindsay from Canada.
Liam Lindsay.
He says, with gratitude.
Where in the hell have you been, Liam?
Liam bowing. Shoshi asks, how can something that is unborn and unceasing be seen?
It can't be. Can't see it. Let's go there, Shoshi.
In the meantime, Junshu asks, what persists when the body dies?
Persistence may persist, but nothing persists as persistence other than persistence. There's no thing persisting. Not two. If you understand not two, ego it can't get any rest there. It drives ego crazy to not know what's happening.
That was a question from Shoto. I made a mistake. What persists when the body
We're the
dies?
same person, I think.
Does that change your answer?
What was the first one?
The question was, what persists when the body dies? I thought that was from Junshu, but it's actually from Shoto.
Oh, well, if it's Junchu, then nothing persists. Nothing persists.
But if it's from Shoto,
Then
what persists when the body dies?
nothing persists.
Juzan asks, are concepts living entities?
I don't feel that the concept itself has some kind of a living quality to it, but it does have a kind of energy and a kind of persistence that seems to get its nutrition from the passion, aggression, and ignorance. So not wanting this, but wanting that. The constructs that come up in the thinking process and the fourth skandha, the samskaras, are thought forms that are coming out of the Alaya Vijnana, or the storehouse consciousness, and coming through the seventh consciousness, or the paranoid aspect of the mind that thinks there is somebody that needs protecting or advancing. And so those structures are used, so they might have an energetic force to them. But I don't know. Maybe it'd be helpful to think of them that way. It doesn't seem that way here. They look more like they look dead. They look dead, although they're used in such a way that they come to life because of the energy of what? Passion, aggression, and ignoring or shutting down, and just even ignoring as an energy to it. No, I don't want that. There's an aggressive quality, but there's also a shutting down. We're not going to look that way. We're going to look somewhere else. So it's a very interesting area to watch how the three poisons join hands. The rooster, the chicken, the snake, all just ancient images for the way we avoid our Buddha nature, our perfected nature.
Michael Stoltz has another question. He asks, is the ego just a concept?
Yes, it is. So you don't have to get rid of it.
And Juzan's follow-up question, how are concepts different from thoughts?
So I think it's a concept is just a more frozen or solidified thought forms. So thoughts have more of a wavy, oscillating kind of appearance to them. So you can't really, I'm sure you've noticed, you can find a concept, but you can't really find a thought unless you conceptualize it. And then it starts to look more like a bread box or a toaster that doesn't work. But thought forms themselves are the way that consciousness moves into some kind of patterning based on pushing, pulling, or shutting down, trying to be somebody, even being a failure, even being a total failure is still ego.
Shoshi has a follow-up question. What are you pointing at when you describe that which is unborn and unceasing?
Pointing at it's just a way of talking about the fundamental perfected nature. There's nothing to change. There's nothing to modify or change, or for that matter, even see different than what is here. I've said this over and over again, and I know Shoshi, you've heard me say this. You're looking at it. It's just that you're looking at your idea of it. You're looking at your idea. You look at this person's a teacher. You can't see who's here. You will see who's here when you see who's there. And when you see who's there, that's because you've seen who's here. That's what the teacher does. That's what any teaching person does. It's like a mirror.
Hakaran has a question following up to Shoshi's. If we cannot see the unborn and unceasing quality, how do we know it?
Just continue rather than look for something that will be a stand-in for a result or give you some kind of credential. It's It's without credentials. So the ego mind, the self-centered mind, the knowledge collecting, the credential collecting mind is going to be left out. And that, as Trungpa Rinpoche said 50 years ago, or thereabouts, ego does not want to, it wants this, but it knows that when it goes that way, it's its own funeral. It's because it doesn't die, it doesn't have to die, it's just seen to be unreal.
She also asks, what does realization mean?
Well, okay, I'll try. So to realize, just like realize that fire is hot, water is wet, earth is hard, wind moves, to realize that nothing is separate from anything else. Separated, fire is separate from water, but it's just phenomena. Human beings are separated from each other, but they're fundamentally not separate. We're separated from trees, gophers, landscape, sun and moon, stars, galaxies, oak leaves on the ground, separated. But to realize this is to still be embodied, still have all of your sense fields, and to be able to move and still have all of your passion, aggression, ignorance showing up and showing down and showing up and showing down. And the main word that I would use here, since you're going that direction, is realization it's called freedom. At the same time, you have not gotten rid of anything. Nothing has happened. It's not, if it's an occurrence, it's going to go away. Your realization will fade if it's an occurrence. That's a great place to ask questions around. So I'm not very smart. Well, that's kind of false humility. As soon as I saw Sensu come in with her mask on, sitting 20 feet away, I thought, oh, there's a safe person. Well, the other guys have masks on too, though. I think everybody has a mask on but me, and I should put my mask on. I'm just going to take it right back off because I might have to answer a question. I'm not mocking this. I think this is a good idea.
Michael Stoltz has another question. Of the three poisons, just start becoming concepts. And then he says, now are the three boys just thoughts and concepts? Oh, are the three poisons just thoughts that have become concepts? That's what he's asking. The three boys.
Yeah, I was kind of stuck on that.
I like that.
Yeah.
Are the three poisons just thoughts that have become concepts?
Yes and no. Yes, you can move them into a conceptual understanding, but no, in that they're very definite energies that you might have concepts about them or ideas about them. But to understand it deeply, it seems necessary to see the way passion, grasping, and aggression, or pushing away, and ignorance is shutting down, the way those interlace with each other and support each other. They're basically all just ignorance, but it's the reaching out kind and the pulling back kind. Just basic ignorance coming as the first of the 12 links in the chain of existence is Marikpa, or avidya, ignorance. And there's probably something before then, but no one's come up with a concept for it. We can call it before avidya. I'll have to ask Chisho. Go ahead.
Shoto has another question. You teach always about awareness, in quotes. How can there be a difference in seeing what's actually in front of us and what we think is in front of us?
Repetition. That's why it's called a practice. Sit down, hold still, and watch the movement, because nothing lasts. delusion does not last. So, but if and, to use a lot of phrase fillers, look at it, just look. You have everything you need. All you need to do is to hear that. Just look at what this is. All the Buddha basically did was say, find out who you are. Work out your salvation with diligence, he said, as he was passing into his parinirvana. He didn't say, believe everything I said, build golden idols. Work out your salvation with diligence.
David W. asks, are concepts dependently arisen?
Yes. You can't find something that's not dependently arisen. It's dependent on, has a different trajectory maybe than other things, but everything is dependent on something else where it's apparent singularity or identity, or including thought patterns, including emotions, including.
Chisho asks, it's a two-part question. How do we relate these discussions back to the original intent of dealing with suffering? Is it important to not forget that starting point of these
I
teachings?
think that's a good idea. Yes, and the way, was that Chisho? Yeah, and the way each person would do that is going to be different. Some people are very, very intellectual and will do that through that kind of a path or that kind of trajectory. And other people are very, very intuitive and have the use of concepts to some extent, but that's not an area they work with. They work with intuition, which does not show up in communication in the same way that concepts do, which convert easily into language. So therefore, I'm sure you've all noticed, some people seem smarter than others. This is untrue. It just looks that way. But the people who are more intuitive or more working with the mind in a less structured or formless way, their understanding could be just as deep or even deeper in some ways. This is why anyone can attain awakening. But they might have to take a look at it. They might have to stop in their tracks and stop chasing squirrels. Go ahead.
Shoshi has another question. Are concepts about the true nature of reality also the true nature of reality?
Yeah, if you don't get hooked on them. If you think, I think I've discovered something, then this is circular. Then you go back into a labyrinth called me, and my stuff, my ideas, and what I know and what I can say, and what really sounds good and what doesn't really sound good, and what works and what aligns with the teaching of Siddhartha Gautama and what doesn't. And people, any conversation with anybody will lead you into their particular version of what all this is about, including they'd rather practice Taoism because it's more formless, or they'd rather be shamans.
Akaran has another question. Does being present in the now relate to realization?
No, present in the now is a concept that is a fill-in for the actual present. If you think you're in the now, you're not. You can't think you're in the now. You can think you're in the then, like you can remember the future and forget the past. Easy. Come and get me, you guys. Not making any sense.
Shoto asks,
Yes.
when you point to awareness, are you pointing away from content?
No, I see where that's coming from, but no, right through the middle of it. Just look at the content. The awareness of the content will show you relatively spoken, will show you the space around the content. This is the path. But it won't stay that way. Once you see that, if you congratulate yourself too quick, then you'll be noticing how much awareness there is around all your thought patterns, and you'll start to make assumptions about which boomy you're on.
Michael Stoltz has, no, go ahead.
It's just a dumb joke.
Oh, he has one. He says the three poisons are definitely boys.
Who said that?
Michael Stoltz,
Yeah.
voice to text and how
Yeah.
it scrambles
voice.
things.
The three
He
poisons?
said the three poisons, but it came out the three boys.
I see.
And he says the three poisons are definitely boys.
Okay. I'll keep that in mind.
And then Kiyun asks, what occurs with the movement that we observe?
So the movement may come and may go, it may start, it may slow down, it may speed up, it may do all kinds of things, but it's the space in which that occurs that isn't doing anything. So it may show up, may speed up, may slow down. Initially, we might start to add on things about that. Well, that must mean, or my mind is slowing way down. That must mean, or things are really speeding up. I'm getting very racy. It's getting very speedy. That must. And we abandon what's happening for what it implies or what it means, or some kind of credential, negative, positive, or neutral.
It appears that we've exhausted the questions at this point.
Any questions here for people that are 20 feet away with masks on? No? You all good? They're all looking at their watches.
Oh, Shoto has another question.
Shoto.
Does seeing a distinction between what we think we see and what's actually there affect the awareness? I just don't understand that distinction.
So I can help you there. Seeing that you don't understand the distinction means that you see it, but you can't think about it. So you're seeing it. And the feeling that you don't understand it tells me two things. One is you're actually beginning to see that. I'm not congratulating you, by the way. But it's too simple. It's too simple. You want something else. You want something else about that to help you trap that open dimension. Just all you have to do is keep going. It will not be. It might have a quality of showing up, but it won't be particularly an event, because if it does, it won't last. It'll go away.
Kevin Townley has a question.
All right, Kevin.
If I see that I'm in the then, capital T, the then, am I in the now, capital T, capital N?
No. Those are both other. So that's why when I'm kind of mock or make fun of people who are trying to be here now, like Ram Dass was with his book back in 1971 or 2, Be Here Now. And it's a nice idea, and it's a kind of romantic. If you ever read that book, or people say, just be here now, just be here now. That's a up 10. It just comes apart, and so it's a temporary quality that one can kind of lecture oneself. But don't do anything. Just observe. Just whatever's happening, just receive it. As Rinpoche said 100 years ago or whenever, Trungpa, it's a straight drink. I don't recommend alcohol at all, but his metaphor was, it's a really dry martini. In other words, nothing in it but just vodka. So his metaphor, I would say it's the same way. Just whatever it is, just that. Don't mix anything with it. You don't know what it is. You can actually look at everything and not see and not understand conceptually what you're even looking at. And then the sense of who you are and the sense of what everything else is start to, in a very creepy kind of way. I had to say it that way. I'm not even going to apologize for that. I hope it scares the hell out of you. It needs to. Go ahead.
Hakaran has another question. At the second your finger touches fire is that instant realization before a definition arises or judgment? The quality of the present moment, could that be realization?
I understand your metaphor, and I can see where you might come up with that kind of situation. I think that's still prior to it. That's still some kind of a wish. I mean, using an image of fire is pretty strong, but it's some kind of a wish to have some of knowing what it is, and actually standing in front of a doorway that says Dharma, and to continually analyze the hinges and the handles and tell whether it's a red door, blue door, pink door, or it's a narrow door, it's a wide door. Go through the door. And how that shows up for anyone who's listening, whether you're a student of mine or if you're not a student of anything, it's your door. It's your Dharma gate. Your emotions, those are the doors. Difficult to do without some kind of training. I think it's difficult to do without the 3 jewels, though it has been done, but rarely.
Question from someone we're not familiar with asks,
What's their name?
I don't see one.
Just a number. Okay.
Jinchi says, there's a question from someone I don't know. And the question is,
Right.
How do we manipulate energy?
Stop trying to manipulate energy. That's how you manipulate it. You are energy. And if you're trying to manipulate it, then you're separating yourself as some kind of an actor acting upon something like a shaman or a wizard, something like this. This is just horse shit. I don't mean to be impolite or disrespectful to your wish to manipulate energy, but you might want to sit down for a couple of years and look at a wall and get to know energy, the energy that is not separate from your consciousness. This is powerful energy. Find out who you are, so there's no doubts, not just someone who wants to find out how to manipulate energy.
Stephanie Squibb asks, does consciousness ever stop moving?
It doesn't really move, so all the junk flies around in it, but it doesn't do anything. Consciousness doesn't belong to anyone. Awareness does a little bit. Find out. How do you find out, Stephanie, or anyone else? Sit down, hold still, watch the movement in the consciousness. It has that kind of relativity to begin with, the first number of years. Watch what moves.
Now I think we've exhausted the questions.
Okay. Anything else here?
Could dedicate the merit.
Dedicate the merit, certainly. Shut this on. Yes.
Yes.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Kyo san shi fu, shi son bu sa mo ko sa, mo ko ho ja ho ro mi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita. O Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions and the 3 times, please hear us. Please come down out of the light and protect Sokokoji Buddhist Temple Monastery, our Sangha, families, friends, and visitors. Heal everyone who is unhappy, sick, or suffering, and fill them with light.
And I hope everyone who is online, who joined us, stays safe and protected and healthy. and I'll try to come in next Wednesday. This works out. We're trying very hard, with a lot of intention to stay separated from people in the monastery or different buildings are tuning in on sometimes on Zoom, but also on YouTube. The same as someone is thousands of miles away. So anyway, praying for all of you.